Hi there, and welcome to this video austraLYSIS at Milperra sessions. This is the first of 5 videos, 4 of performance and 1 of scientific discussion concerning new music. I'm Roger Dean, I'm the director of austraLYSIS, and I'm also a research professor at MARCS Institute for Brain, Behaviour and Development. So this series of videos represents 2 performances that we gave at the MARCS Institute in Milperra, Sydney in 2018 and 19 that comprise a whole series of novel musical styles, novel intermedia pieces, and challenging artistic presentation, I hope. The videos contain not only the performances, the music, the intermedia, but also some introductions and discussion by members of austraLYSIS about the music, about the intermedia, about how it works, about how they contribute creativity to it, and about how they appreciate elements, for example, which go up to make music, timbre, pitch, rhythm, etc. So austraLYSIS is actually quite an unusual ensemble in that amongst the 5 core members who you'll see in these performances, we hold 7 doctoral degrees. So we're very interested in the interface between creativity, creative work, and research, that is, research concerning appreciation of music and intermedia. The sandwiched video in the middle concerns scientific work about those issues, and it is presented by colleagues of mine at the MARCS Institute for Brain, Behaviour and Development. So before we get straight into the musical content, I'd like to introduce the director of our institute, Professor Kate Stevens, who will just say a little bit about MARCS and its relevance to this project. Later on in the series of videos, you'll see Kate talking in more depth about her own work and how it also contributes to appreciation of artistic work. Here's Kate.
Thanks, Roger. My name is Kate Stevens. I'm Professor in Psychology and the Director of MARCS Institute for Brain, Behaviour and Development at Western Sydney University. MARCS is home to around 100 academic and student researchers, an interdisciplinary research concentration. It brings together researchers from cognitive science, neuroscience, linguistics, a range of different areas in psychology, as well as music science and engineering. We investigate human interaction and well-being across the lifespan by studying in particular non-verbal and verbal communication. If you think of music as a widespread cultural form, it is a superb window or lens on human perception and cognition. austraLYSIS at MARCS demonstrates an arts-based practice that is based on a foundation of research on computational creativity, for example, as well as the integration of auditory and visual perception. MARCS and Western are very pleased to be hosting austraLYSIS, a truly art science experience. Enjoy.
Hi again, Roger Dean from austraLYSIS and MARCS. Now you're going to hear the first piece in the first of our 2 concerts, which goes to make up this series of videos. This is called Remembering Louis and Cecil, and it's related to Louis Couperin, composer and improviser, who died in 1661, and Cecil Taylor, African-American pianist, improviser, who died only at the beginning of the year in which we recorded this. Couperin wrote a remarkable series of what are called unmeasured preludes with a special notation, and they really are a kind of codification of a set of notes to be used, pitches that is, to be used for improvising. For example, while the pitch sequence is defined, the timings, the relative timings of each individual pitch is not specified. That gives a huge amount of freedom to an interpreter. Interpreters always have freedom, but this is a massive level of freedom. And as this is connected with improvising traditions at the time, we've in austraLYSIS repeatedly used this piece as a basis of several different kinds of improvisations. So you're going to hear one now, and also one in a later video from the second performance, the second concert. So one of the interesting things about improvising with this is the possibility to expand the horizons of the keyboard instrument. These unmeasured preludes were written for keyboard instruments, for example, making sounds from within the piano. Another is to use digital, that is electroacoustic, transformation of sounds. And you're going to hear both things here. The part of Cecil is really a tribute. It's a representation of how Cecil Taylor, the African-American pianist, was such a major influence in improvised music, particularly improvised music related to jazz, but not only that I, and I'm sure my fellow austraLYSIS members would share the wish, wanted to represent a kind of respect and interest in the work by this performance. In fact, during the year, I played a certain small tribute to Cecil Taylor in every performance I gave. So at the outset of this work, you hear that. Later on, you hear the unmeasured fantasia literally as it was transcribed, written at the time and documented in various libraries. And you hear our view of how one might improvise on it now. So here we are, remembering Louis and Cecil.
Hello, I'm Hazel Smith, and I am a poet and writer and an emeritus professor at Western Sydney University. I also used to be a professional musician and enjoy collaborating with musicians. I'm really interested in the way writing can extend itself when it is combined with music. I believe that words and music together can create unique effects that are sometimes more powerful than either on their own. In my work, I like to experiment with language and with the way you might tell a story or write a poem. You will see that the next piece, The Character Thinks Ahead, experiments with language and with form. The Character Thinks Ahead explores the different meanings of the word character and plays on those different meanings. A character, for example, can be a symbol in computing or a letter in language. It can be a person in a play, novel, or film, or it can be a way of describing a person's ethical attitudes in relation to their behaviour, because, as you know, we sometimes refer to someone as having a bad or a good character. There are lots of different things happening at once in this piece. Don't feel you have to hear, see, and read everything at the same time. Just try to immerse yourself in it or focus on aspects of it that interest you, and don't worry about what you are missing. You will hear me performing a text that is scripted, but sometimes as part of the soundtrack, you will also hear particular words or phrases that have been sampled and processed. By that I mean that they have been recorded and that their pitch, rhythm, and timbre have been manipulated by Greg White so that the sound becomes a musical element in the piece. You will also see text appear gradually on the screen. The screen is divided into 6 sections, 3 at the top, 3 at the bottom. Initially, these sections appear blank, but they will gradually fill up. In the upper middle section, the text is composed by me. In the other 2 upper sections, new text is generated by the computer using my text as a basis. You will see how this text often looks fragmented, may sometimes not use normal grammar, and may sometimes include words that are not actually real words. This occurs through a process known as machine learning, which Roger will talk about elsewhere. In the middle section, in the lower half of the screen, there is a word cloud, a changing constellation of words and letters. In the left-hand and right-hand lower sections are dynamic and colourful visualizations of the voice in both its raw and digitally manipulated state. The Character Thinks Ahead also includes a score with instructions for the performers, but there are no actual notes or rhythms in the score. It is up to the musicians how they want to improvise, how they play with each other, and how their improvising responds to the words they are hearing and the words on the screen. Sometimes the performers may respond to the meanings of the words, sometimes they may respond to the sounds of the words, sometimes they may respond to a mood. Sometimes they may decide to play something that doesn't relate to the words, but relates to the sounds made by other players. In austraLYSIS, we enjoy engaging with the relationships between words and music in many different ways. You may want to think about these relationships as you watch and listen to this piece. Also bear in mind that this piece is not fixed. It will be different every time it is performed.
That's his character. As if they needed, and as if that they needed, and that's his character. As if they needed, and could be easily reversed. Safely seated, we rail it without flirting first. You turn your head until it is almost up. Smart. The word runs faster. Roll right to rolls on its back. White, the white is a white ourselves.
I'm not interested in characters so much as voice, she said. She was trying to keep character malleable. Like plasticine or Lego, it succumbs to eager hands. He suffered from mood swings, and they said that's his character, as if they needed an excuse. Meanwhile, as the narrative swayed and tottered, characters came and went. They sported different hats, genders, and ethnicities. They wore masks that they sometimes removed. Each unmasking revealed another mask. The unpeeling never expired. A neurological cleansing rite, a robotic stripping down. Outside, poets and novelists were sparring swords and preparing for a verbal duel. As the characters build up the word, they wish they could take meaning down. To be free of those insufferable autocrats. What bliss, next time we'll be better armed. Sometimes the characters look both ways, enough to stall semantics. There were fierce battles as oncoming words laid their conditions out. It's not nuclear yet, but there are always those trying to crash through languages, high and fortified walls. They sported different hats, genders, and ethnicities. They wore masks that they sometimes removed. Each unmasking revealed another mask. The unpeeling never expired. And there was the cleansing rite, a robotic stripping down. As the character on stage thinks ahead, we outmaneuver him, predict his wavering decline. It's going to result in death or divorce, we cry, as if the audience can advise and warn. Flashbacks and flash-forwards outsmart the narrative frame. We pretend that the words are still in flux, and the outcome could be easily reversed. Safely seated, we rail at sexism, racism, spectators at a bloody sport. Nobody can plan anything without flirting first with their own autistic thoughts. You turn your head until it is almost off its hook and ready to autonomously spin. But thinking ahead means glancing backwards, sideways too. You live with all the whispers you ignored. They persist like anthills or succumb to dilution in endless imagistic dissolves. Reputation is the shadow. Character is the tree. I'm unsure what Lincoln sought to paint. Quotations have a bell-like resonance that outwits their finely tuned shell. The word tries to backtrack. The character waves its arms. The word stabs back aggressively. The character nonchalantly smiles. The word wipes back a few tears. The character rolls on its back. The word hails another word. The character flexes its joints. The word tries to chase the character down, but it is less bloated, runs faster, and escapes. To think is to stretch and somersault. To think is to kick and caress. Thinking can be rhythmic and circular, an algorithmic throwing of the dice. Thinking can be crazy prediction, decisions that divide and spawn. Thinking makes very little difference to where the bullets take aim. Is there such a thing as character? Is behaviour simply social malaise? Everyone has character traits. The critic drone, both good and bad. But once you start to stereotype, the white squeezes out the coloured. The actor said she loved to pretend that she was someone else. Most of us aspire to be ourselves. In the election campaign, they argue about her character and characteristically ignore his. You imagine a world where words absent themselves or riot as if permanently drunk. Meanwhile, the language police send out the word to mow the refuseniks down. But they will rise again and push forward, knocking over time and space. No character has a final resting place. Nuance kick-starts the dead.
Now we have a piece called Fields, which is somewhat about ecological environments, as you will hear, but it's also about the idea of musicians relating to environments or organisms relating to environments, and they could be even cultural as well as physical. And this features Phil, who gets the chance to interact with quite a lot of different environmental sounds and spaces. There can be silences as well as sounds.
Hi, I'm Phil Slater. I'm a trumpet player, composer, and improviser, and have been a member of austraLYSIS for the past 20 years. My contributions to the creative work of austraLYSIS has helped me to make more concrete concepts as they relate to ecological approaches to performance. The atypical and variable performance environments provide unique opportunities for me to explore music making in ways not typically found. My primary interest was trying to unpack this idea of environmental resources for performance. So often that's presented as musical responses to landscape. I was quite interested in sort of grappling with that problem from a non-representational perspective. So we have lots of recorded evidence of composers' work and their annotations to their works describing how the music sounds like the environment and is a sort of almost a pictorial representation of environmental sounds. So I've been interested in that sort of challenge for the last sort of 10 or 15 years. I studied with Peter Sculthorpe. I was sort of deeply interested in the music that was being made in Australia and quite interested in why it sounded different, but why it might sound different. So that led me down into sort of three areas of research interest: an ecological dynamics approach, an embodied cognition approach, and a cultural geographic approach. At no stage was I ever trying to sound like the spaces or the places I was practicing in. I never considered it to be performance work. It was skill acquisition work. Instead of it being about representing landscape, it was about how could place or landscape be embodied within the skills that I developed. So over a developmental time frame of 12 months, I did daily spontaneous improvisational practice in landscapes around where I live and tried to account for the changes that were taking place. And then I produced a creative work that accommodated those changes that occurred. So it was important for me to explore these alternative approaches, particularly around ideas of cognition and action and perception. So the basic theory around ecological dynamics, which is a theory that's emerging out of movement science, sports science, is a coupling of two theoretical frameworks. One is the dynamical systems theory approach, which is at its core, particularly as it relates to human movement and development, it's about constraints, how constraints congest and remove possibilities for movement. So there's lots of research in terms of the way that walking develops in children that points to structural features of the body enabling walking to occur as opposed to a mimicry or a copying approach to the behaviors. So ecological dynamics is interested in this idea of self-organization and exploration under a framework of constraints. What actions are being constrained? How are they being constrained? On the other side is the ecological psychology approach, which is interested in the way that the information of environments informs cognition and decision-making. For the ecological dynamics theory, the main idea from ecological psychology is this concept of affordance, that the environment at all stages of our development and evolution have afforded certain things to occur. So we've got this binary of affordances and constraints. The ecological dynamics approach is really a learning approach, and their theory is that if we can adjust or alter the constraints of the learner, that new skills can emerge spontaneously because of the power of self-organization, the power of the congestion or the constraint upon behaviors, and the availability of information. So we try to constrain the learner so that they may pick up new forms of information that are available in the environment within which they're performing. And any changes in that environment, in that system, can have dramatic impacts. So part of my performance practice is to be sensitive to the system, to the changes within the system and how that might impact upon me as a performer. You know, you play louder or softer to experience a certain resonance in a space. Quite often that will cause changes in pitch choices. So I will choose to play in certain registers and certain pitches to experience a certain resonance. So it's almost like an epistemic approach to playing. I'm making decisions to learn more about the performance environment that I'm in. I like to think of it more in terms of like a longer developmental sort of time frame than the individual experience. Doing one push-up, you experience the push-up, but it doesn't really have an adaptive change over a longer period of time. But doing 10 push-ups every day for 3 weeks will have that adaptive change. So that's part of the systems approach that I like to take, is that all of these individual experience aggregate into adaptation, physical sensitivity to the instrument, and that can be transferred to the performance context. I think that the auditory stimulation is information that I'm reacting to, but the primary focus for me is the physical space that I'm in, the physical space of the piano, the physical space of the trumpet, the sonic material that's coming through the surround sound speaker array. Straight away, I'm trying to make sense of my sound coming from a very direct position, and the recorded materials are creating quite a different performance space. I'm actually challenged by that. The recorded materials, I was trying to sound good with that, not copy it. That co-adaptive nature of niche construction is at the core of performance for me. I do something, you do something, I do something, you do something, and together we evolve and grow into that emergent quality is really interesting to me.